Hey everyone, welcome to the Curse of Oak Island and Beyond live stream. I am your host, Jeff Freeman, and riding in the co-pilot seat tonight is Tom Burns. Tom, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Riding shotgun.
Riding shotgun, yes indeed. I tell you what, this is going to be a good one, folks, because this gentleman has written so many books now about Oak Island. I think he tried to give up about 5 books ago, and it just keeps clawing at him to do more, get more research, a little bit more stuff coming out. And oh my gosh, I have to write about it. And now he's gone on and he's written a couple more here, just recently released, almost back to back. So author and researcher James A. McQuiston is joining us, and we are going to get started with Jim. So hold on, we're going to have a great time. We'll get started here right now.
This is Robert Clotworthy, the narrator of The Curse of Oak Island, and I have a question for you. Could it be that you are listening to The Curse of Oak Island and Beyond live stream?
This is a top pocket find, mate, for sure.
All right, we have the top pocket find, mate, for sure, right here. James McQuiston, thank you, sir, for coming on the show tonight.
You're
that was
muted,
my
Jim.
fault. There we go. I got you.
Okay. Thank you for me. Hello, Tom.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Good to meet you. You know, I have to say, Jeff, you just have such a great show, and just watching that intro and seeing all those familiar faces, and just thinking about watching those shows and meeting some of those people, and it's just a great thing you're doing. So,
well, I appreciate that, Jim, a lot. You know, it's been an absolute blessing. I've met such wonderful people, all the people in the chat. We have so many people that come by for the show and on a regular basis, plus all the people that I've met that have come on the show. It truly has been a blessing. I just can't believe that I get to do this and meet people like yourself and have an author. How many books have you written now? How many is it total?
Well, there's no kind of books, and then there's like 6 or 7 other books. So somewhere, whatever that adds up to.
Well, I tell you what, and I have to apologize because you know, I haven't completely gone through all of them yet. But I own several now, and I've been reading them. And you know, you and I are working on a little project on the side that's still being in the process of being worked on as well. But I tell you, this new book, and Tom nailed it just a few minutes ago. He and I were talking in the pre-show there a little bit about the fact that, well, Tom, you talk about the sections of the book that you said you find so easy to get through.
Well, Well, okay. First of all, the most recent book, this one,
Yes.
you can see I've made a few notations. But what I found really helpful at the back of this book, Jim, was when you do your recap of your theory at the back, and you give us an outline. It draws the whole thing together. You're not trying to put it all sort of in order in your mind as you read it, but when you get to the back of the book and you read this, compile it with the front of the book, you go, yep, this all makes sense now.
Well, you know, there's an awful lot of details in all of these books, which they were kind of the driving force in writing them, because I would get done with one and then somebody would ask me a question, they'd email me or whatever, and I'd start looking, and then I'd find all this, it's ready for the taking. A lot of it is in books that were scanned in by universities, like Rutgers University is one of them, and they let you download a PDF or a text file of them, and some of them are from the 1600s and the 1700s.
Oh, wow.
You can get the King's Privy Council minutes from the 1600s, and once you get a PDF or a text file, you can just do a search. So if I'm looking for any of my people, I just do a search, and all the pages where it's at will come up. So it's a kind of research that wasn't possible even probably 10 years ago, because there just weren't the resources online that there are now. And of course, I have like 500 books behind me here too. But I'll tell you how this book developed.
Yes.
Interesting is that I had just finished my Oak Island Curses, Codes, and Secret Societies. And in that book, I found a code created by Mary Queen of Scots. And every code on the 90-foot stone was also in her codex, every single one of them. And it made pretty good sense when you would try to translate it. There was only one that wasn't in there, and that was the 3-dot triangle. And that's on the 90-foot stone 3 times. Well, it took me a while to find out what that was, but that's still used. It's the symbol for a master mason. But back then, it was the symbol for the Grand Master of the stonemasons. And where it was used on the 90-foot stone, it was used right in front of the name of the man who was the Grand Master of the Scottish stonemasons. So if that isn't the case, it's one heck of a coincidence. Mm-hmm. So that's what that book was principally about, was establishing proof, I guess you would say, of the 90-foot stone existence, but also telling how I got this code. It took me 3 months to locate it, and it was in a back room. It had never been scanned, so they scanned it for me. I had to pay for getting it. So as an individual, I was, at least at one time, the owner of the only digital collection, other than the fact that the UK National Archives owned it too, because they scanned them in for me, so they got a free copy, I guess. But anyway, and then I went through connections to the Freemasons and a little bit on the Knights Templar. So that's why the title was as it was. And it's a great little book, but I almost didn't have chance to enjoy it too much, because as soon as I published it, I can't tell who buys my books, but I can tell how many have sold. And right after I put it online, 3 books sold that day. One of the ones that sold was to a gentleman named Art, I believe you say it, Art Genus, or Genus, but I believe it's Genus. And he's from up that way somewhere. And he wrote me and he said, "Did you ever think that maybe Mary Queen of Scots?" He said, "I'm halfway through the book already." He just got it. He's halfway through the book already. He says, "Great, but did you ever think that maybe Mary Queen of Scots got her codes from somewhere, like, for instance, the Knights Templar?" Well, of course, that was a challenge. So that day, and I started finding incredible information. So without even having any dwell time after that book, I started right into the next book, which is Oak Island Knights Templar and Freemasonry.
Yep.
And so what I found, first of all, ultimately, I'm looking at Mary Queen of Scots as not necessarily a personal participant in it, although she was in a few instances, but as the apex, more or less, between the era of the Knights Templar and the era of the Freemasons. The reason for that is because she was related to several Knights Templars, and she facilitated the last two transfers of Templar land in Scotland. One of them was to William Alexander's family, the man that he's my chief suspect for Oak Island, and he was the owner of Nova Scotia. He created it, he named it, and that, I believe, was 1553. And then there was still some remnants of the Knights Templar and Knights of Malta, or the Knights of St. John, the Hospitallers, of land out there. So she made a deal with this guy was actually like the lawyer for representing those organizations, the remnants of them. And his name was James Sandilands. And she made a deal with him. If you turn all the rest of this over to the crown, I will give you a certain patch of land, and I will make you what's called Lord Torpichen, which is a title that still exists. And so he probably didn't have a lot of choices, because, if the queen or the king tells you, hey, I'd like to do something, you got to do it.
Yeah. You're not going to say, no, that's okay, I'm good.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's very rarely a question mark at the end of that
Yeah,
sentence.
exactly. Yeah.
So, and I think that might have been 1574, but don't quote me on that. But anyway, so she was actually involved in the end of Templar ownership of any properties in Scotland. And again, she had descended from some Templars, including the next to the last Grand Master. And that's an interesting tale. There were, when you think of the siege of Acre, which is where the Templar treasure disappeared in the Holy Land.
Yep.
There were actually two, and they were 100 years apart. And in the first one, that was when Crusaders were attacking Acre, attacking the Muslims in Acre. And this gentleman named, it looks like it says Theobald, but it was actually pronounced Tybald, like the bold. It was a contortion of words, the bold. And he died in the attack of that. Well, years later, his grandson creates what they called the Barons Crusade, and he takes a bunch more crusaders down there, and he actually controls Jerusalem, and he negotiates a lot of peace with various Muslim groups to try to stop the fighting, whatever. Well, the next to the last, well, they all descended from a gentleman called Theobald the Good. In fact, he's the one that got killed in the first siege of Acre. Well, the last Grand Master of the Templars before Jacques de Molay was Thibault Gaudin, and Gaudin means the good. He was born in the same town where all the Theobalds had come from in France, and so there's no genealogical chart that will point directly to him, but he's got the same name as the guy that would have probably been his great-great-grandfather, and he was fighting at the next siege of Acre 100 years later, and he's the one that snuck out with the treasures at night with 10 other Templars. And the gentleman that he rode with, you know how they like Tonto rode with the Lone Ranger type thing, he was the third to the last Knights Templar Grand Master, and he was also the brother of the wife of the Tybalt that created the Barons Crusade. So they were all, it's like all in the family type of a situation. Yep. And so they when they saw that they were trying to make peace, and they let some of they weren't really Muslims per se, they were called Mamluks, and they were a group of mercenary soldiers. Basically, some were Asian. They had a number of nationalities, but they were paid mercenaries. Although they were slaves at the time, they couldn't just go their own way. They had to fight for basically the Egyptians at the time.
Right.
And so they let some of them in to Accra the night before or the day before, with the idea that they would make peace with them. And immediately they were mounted on horses, and immediately they started just like the cowboys coming into town, raising heck. And one of the things they were doing was grabbing up Christian women to try to take back with them. So they eventually all got thrown off the walls of Accra. So now they knew that war was inevitable and there was going to be a siege. So this Tybalt Gowden was chosen to take the treasures with 10 other Templars, and they snuck out of Accra by boat, and they went to a town up the coast called Sidon, and then they went over to I believe it was Malta. But anyway, so but he didn't last very long. He was apparently wounded in the battle because he was only Grand Master for 6 months, and because the other Grand Master died in the siege, so he became the next Grand Master, but he died within 6 months, and they say probably from his wounds in the siege, and that's when it got transferred to Jacques de Molay. And by that point, they knew the jig was up in the Holy Land. So Molay basically went back to France. He wanted to, build a new crusade, but there was a waning interest in it because it had cost so much, and they really hadn't, these kingdoms hadn't really gained that much out of it. They'd losing, they'd win, and then they'd lose and win and lose, kind of like being in Afghanistan, I guess. So, that they just, the kings just said, enough's enough. I've given you too much money now. So that's when the Templars started saying, well, we know how to do our own thing. And they became the bankers. And when they were finally dissolved, they say there were more clerks and bookkeepers than there were soldiers, because they had tenement buildings, they had, chapels, they were regular businessmen at that point.
To become the early multinational corporation.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's very true.
With vertical integration.
So everybody knows, the story of the dissolution of them by King Philip, and one of the main theories is that some of them at least went up to Scotland, and one of the clans that they partnered with up there was the MacDonald clan, which is my family comes from the MacDonalds, and the current Knight Baronet of Nova Scotia, by the way, is Sir Ian MacDonald McQuiston, who is my distant cousin. And MacDonald is the number one name in Nova Scotia, and it's also the number one name on Prince Edward Island. So there's a strong MacDonald presence there still today. And they had a sort of their own kingdom. The MacDonalds, it's called the Lord of the Isles, and they controlled the Western Isles, where the Upper Isles, the northern ones, were controlled by the Sinclairs, and then the Stuarts kind of controlled mainland Scotland as best they could if the other two weren't giving them trouble. So John MacDonald was the last Lord of the Isles, and his brother is Ushton, the guy that I descend from, McUshton. His sons were McQuistons, which became McQuiston. But John gave up his title in 1498 because he just couldn't compete with the Stuarts anymore. They'd gotten so strong. And he died in 1503. Well, King James gave his widow, who was Mary Livingston, or Elizabeth Livingston, he gave her a chunk of land in the middle of Edinburgh. And she built a chapel there in the name of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and she called it Mary's Chapel. And in those pictures that I sent you, if I don't know if you can just put
Yep.
one right there, but there's one that's a drawing. It's like a structural.
Yes, I think I got it right here. Let me share that real quick here. And there we go. This one here?
Yes, this is the only known rendition, illustration, whatever you want to say, of the original Mary's Chapel, and that is where the first Freemasons were initiated.
Oh, wow.
And there's also another one, I think it's called Nidri Street.
All right, let me see. Let me find that.
I'm really throwing you curve.
Yep, here. Idris Wind. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, wind. Okay, here we go. That's this one here.
That is the street it was on. And
Oh, wow.
those cobblestones, the way things are over there, you know, things last 400 or 500,000 years. There's a very good chance that those cobblestones are the same ones that the first Freemasons walked on, because you know, change them out. But that's the street that Mary's Chapel was located on. So it was the Catholic chapel until the Reformation, which was the mid 1500s. That's what got Mary Queen of Scots kicked out, because she was Catholic, and they closed it down as a chapel. But a guy bought it who was traced back to the Templars, and he was sort of sitting on it there for a while. And in 1618, King Charles sent Sir Francis Bacon and Thomas Howard. Thomas Howard is the guy whose name is on the 90-foot stone. He also happened to own land right over in New Brunswick. I have his charter, so if you ever want to see it, Tom, I can send it to you.
Okay, yeah, sure.
I had to get it translated because it was in Old Scots and Latin, and I couldn't read either one of them. So I paid a lady at the library or the museum in Scotland to translate it for me. But so he sent them up there in November of 1618 on some kind of an archaeological expedition, if you want to say. And the Mary's Chapel was purchased for the stonemasons in November of 1618, the same month. And the very first stonemasons meeting in that building was November 25th, 1618. So for all intents and purposes, it appears that Sir Francis Bacon and Thomas Howard purchased Mary's Chapel so the stonemasons could meet there. Thomas Howard became the Grand Master of the stonemasons.
Now, Linda asked the question: are these buildings still standing, or
no? They actually took the chapel and a few other buildings out to make a like a bridge over, because it was getting so congested. They had to bridge over to another road. But and then there's one other picture that's pretty interesting that goes with those, and it says caverns or tunnels. Yeah,
this here?
That's right underneath it all. And they're extensive. That's just one shot of them, but they have no idea when they were made, and they have no idea what they were used for.
And I'm sorry, what city is this in again?
This is in Edinburgh. It's underneath the road, or in that vicinity of that Nidri Wyn. It's called Nidri Street now, but it was originally called Nidri's Wyn, which was like lane. It was an early word for lane, so it was Nidri's Lane, and then it became Nidri Street today. And these are underneath those buildings.
Wow.
And the Blackfriars, which is possibly one place some of the Templars joined the Blackfriars monks. Their street was the very next street over, and so it can be assumed that they used those tunnels to get over to the meetings. But regardless, so the Masons and the Wrights, who are carpenters, started meeting in Mary's Chapel, and they were still not an esoteric group. They had codes. Their main code was to be faithful to God and the King, and also to not misrepresent the craft, because they valued their reputation. And you can't think of these stonemasons as just grunts. They were doing the work that nobody else could do. And some of the chapels that they've built and cathedrals, I've been in some of them over in Europe. They're incredible. I don't even know if you could find anybody today that could build them. And so they had already worked with the Templars for couple hundred years, because the Templars would finance them and the Stones would build them. So they knew each other for a long, long time. But so after the failed Nova Scotia effort of William Alexander, which I go into in all my other books, and I've talked about it on your show, that ended in 1632. Now, I have to tell you that William Alexander had a map drawn in 1624, and he includes Thomas Howard's name on it by his title, which was the Earl of, can't even think of what it is, but it's so Thomas Howard is not only on the 1624 map of William Alexander, his name appears to show up twice on the 90-foot stone, and he was the stonemason, the Grand Master of the stonemasons when the first Freemasons were initiated. And that took place on July 3rd, 1634. And the people that were initiated, there were three of them. Two of them were sons of William Alexander. And the third one was Al Strachan, who was the man who stole the treasure that I think might be buried on Oak Island. He was a thief, but he was the third Freemason. So when they were initiated, one of them, Anthony Alexander, was actually the Master of Public Works for all of Scotland. So he had direct control of the stonemasons. Thomas Howard was the Grand Master specifically of the stonemasons. They're both part of my story. And the third person that would have had some kind of control was a guy named George Suddy. And he was the dean of all the guilds of Edinburgh. And he descended from Ralph de Sudley, the man who people think brought the Ark of the Covenant back. And I looked into the de Sudley name quite a bit for Doug Crow years ago. And he actually, at his castle, he used to actually charge pilgrims to come to see artifacts that he brought back from the Holy Land. And Ralph de Sudley, and he was a Knights Templar. And he ended up the family ended up moving from England up to Scotland, probably to take refuge. And you have Thomas Howard descended from a Templar. The Alexanders descended from a Templar. They were MacDonalds too. They descended from a man, Alexander MacDonald, and then they took the Alexander name, just like my family descended from Ushton MacDonald and took the Ushton name. They took the Alexander name, but William Alexander actually signed his name, William Alexander MacDonald, a number of times, and his personal coat of arms had the same elements and wording and everything as the standard MacDonald coat of arms. So he considered himself a MacDonald. So you have the widow of the last MacDonald, the last big chief of the MacDonalds, getting Mary's Chapel, and then you have the two sons of William Alexander MacDonald being the first two initiated into that chapel. So all three of those gentlemen that would have controlled the stonemasons on that day, as of July 3rd, all traced back to Knights Templar. So now you have a direct connection of families, Knights Templar families in Scotland, that tie directly to Freemasons in the Freemason Chapel in Edinburgh. Wow. And it's one thing to say, well, they work together on a lot of cathedrals and everything. Yeah, that's a pretty generic statement. But when you can say these three guys that controlled the stonemasons all descended from Knights Templar, that's a pretty big deal. So, like I say, I kind of look at this whole thing of Mary Queen of Scots. She was she was finalizing any last minute business of the Templars. And then her son charters this Mary's Chapel. It's not named for her. It's named for the wife or mother of Jesus, but it's Mary's Chapel. And then that's where the Freemasons started. So they called themselves Edinburgh Lodge Number 1 Mary's Chapel. And so they finally moved out when they tore the building down to put that archway in. Out another building, but right above their door it says Edinburgh Lodge Number 1 Mary's Chapel. So they keep that chapel name because they want to keep that history
right
that they had.
I got a question that popped up here from Robot. He asked, James, were the Freemasons also connected to the Rosicrucians of that period?
Well, I don't know how deeply they were connected, but one of William Alexander's good friends and a fellow investor in the New World was William Vaughan, and he brought a Rosicrucian to meet Charles I and William Alexander. His name was Ziegler. And what was funny about it was the man who was the go-between, his name was David Ramsay. The Ramsays were the Earls of Dalhousie, and they created Dalhousie University about an hour from Oak Island. Familiar with that?
Yep.
Yes, I am. Yeah. Doug talks about that before. Yep.
The actual man who founded the college had just quit being the Scottish Grand Master of Freemasons. His father had held that title. His son took over that title. His nephew took it over. And even all the way down to today, the current Grand Master, his mother was Janet Ramsay. And so even though his name is William McGee, he goes by the nickname of Ramsay. So the Ramsay name has been part of Freemasonry from the early 1630s all the way down to today. And they're also part of Nova Scotia and Dalhousie College. And Dalhousie had a lot of connections to Oak Island. The Oak Island Association met there. Doug told me one day, sort of in confidence, but I think by now it's probably out there, that he heard a rumor that Dalhousie had a complete room full of Oak Island artifacts. And they hadn't been tagged or anything. They were just collected there. And he said rows and rows of them. He told me how many linear meters it was, but I don't work in meters, so that went by me. But he said, I'm trying to figure out how to get a foot in the door there. And I said, well, what I would do is I would make friends with a janitor.
Yeah.
Girl say, oh, yeah, I'll bring you in. I'll let you go in tonight. And I'll show you around, if you don't tell anybody I did it, or something like that, But because those people like that, when we went up to the Nova Scotia archives, in fact, that's where we were when he told me about this. And my wife had her coat with her, and she didn't want to leave it anywhere because it was an expensive coat or whatever. And you're not allowed to take one in because they don't want you to fill your pockets up with all these valuable archives and walk back out. And guard said, what the heck, just take it up anyway. Tell them I said you could. She got up there. Oh, they weren't going to buy it. They called him. Tell her. It was like some kind of law was broken just because she took her coat up there. But they were very helpful. I found some great newspaper clippings for one thing there. And that's where Doug told me that we were all three sitting in a corner. And he told me that little secret. He's trying to figure it out. So what happened was that we were going to have a meeting with them, and we'd been emailing with the archivist, or curator, archivist, I guess, for Dalhousie, probably for 3 months. And we were telling them all these connections. I think there were 8 connections. And that all we want to do is come up and discuss it with them and all that. And until the day I got up there for my war room presentation, I still thought we were going. We were supposed to go 2 days later. And in the war room presentation, Doug says, well, I got bad news. They canceled it. I said, well, he said, they wouldn't tell me why. So that, when stuff happens like that, you just got to think, if the guy was sick, he'd say, I got to cancel it because I'm sick. But he didn't have any excuse for canceling it. So I think somebody got to somebody and said, we don't want them nosing around in here because there's too much history and too many artifacts or whatever. So we never did get to do that. Anyway, it was thanks to Art that I wrote that second book. And there were two reasons I wrote it. I'm going to be presenting to a research lodge of Freemasons next year. And they're going to be bringing in high-level Freemasons from a wide area. And so they were going to work off my Curses, Codes, and Secret Societies book.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, you know what, that's a darn good book, but it's mostly about the stone. And they're going to want to know the connection between the Freemasons and the Knights Templars. So between that and Art asking me that question, I just started. And a lot of times when I start these books, I'm not even sure I'm going to do anything with them. I'll get like 30 pages written up and I'll go, yeah, that's not a bad book. Maybe I'll keep going on it.
Maybe I'll keep going.
So the book really ties them together like they've never been tied together before, not just in a esoteric sense,
right,
but in a pragmatic, this guy was related to this guy. And so it's a good little book. I got as many photos and illustrations. Something else that I sent you there, they're the crosses of Lorraine.
Yes.
3 of them.
Yeah. Let's,
be interesting.
Yeah.
Because this actually verified Art's theory.
Yep. And while I'm bringing these up too, that's the one thing that I find so incredible about your books and about your research. Like you said, it's not esoteric. I mean, you have research down and you've connected this person with this person, the timeline, the families, all the way along the line. I mean, it's hard to dismiss any of that because of the ties that you've uncovered. You can't. Yeah.
I did the Mayflower book. It showed all the people that were connected to Oak Island. And that's when I found out that Thomas Howard and William Alexander and Sir Francis Bacon were all involved with the Mayflower situation, the Plymouth colony situation too. And I didn't know. I'm not sure anybody.
That's something that Jason Mercer, he's over on the Facebook side, and he works a lot with our good friend Jake. Thank you. I'm at a complete loss for that. About that. Jake Roberts.
That's why I ride shotgun.
Thank you. And that's why you do such a great job with it too. But Jason has made several comments about Thomas Howard, 4th Duke of Norfolk, and certainly Norfolk, Virginia was referenced. I mean, he's really enjoying what you're going through right now and what you're explaining right now because he's involved in all this as well. I'm sorry I jumped out of that, but yeah, here's that first.
It's good to hear that somebody else is looking into it because his title was on the 1624 William Alexander map. His name, I believe, was on in fact, you're going to see the symbol for his name in a second here. 90-foot stone twice. And he was part of the Plymouth colony situation. And the reason Nova Scotia was started was to act as a buffer between the French in Canada and the Plymouth colony. That was specific. It was founded. So all these people were the same people doing all of this stuff, controlling the strings. They were the conspiracy. So this is the typical cross of Lorraine, and it was used a lot in the Crusades. It comes from the Duke of Lorraine, who actually was a ancestor of Mary Queen of Scots too. And then the next one.
Let's see. I got to make sure I go the right direction here. Oh, nope, wrong way. Let's go this way. Is that the next one?
Was the way she had that drawn in her codex, and that meant Thomas Howard.
Oh, wow.
Now the next one, that's that's the way it was carved on the 90-foot stone, and it's on there. Lean to it, but if you look at Reverend Kempton's code that he showed to that gentleman that wrote the book, Snow, virtually every single letter, or not letter, but symbol, is leaning. I think somebody was left-handed or something or whatever, but they leaned all the letters, so who knows if that was supposed to be straight up and down or not. And some of them, when Snow translated it, he straightened some of them up, but this isn't one that he did straighten up. But so it's, and then you might recognize where you also saw this in the Templar chapel in Portugal.
Yes, I was going to say that's when I think it was Alex. He recognized this on the wall.
Yes. So that symbol, it was a standard symbol for the Templars. It also became Mary Queen of Scots' symbol for Thomas Howard, who was descended from a Templar and was the Grand Master of the Freemasons, not when she was alive, but later. And it shows up on the 90-foot stone. So, those kinds of things are just, all of this to me is just way too connected to be coincidental. You can't look at all of this data, the people who moved to Oak Island. John Strachan, his forefather was Al Strachan, the guy that stole the treasure. If you read all the books and you come to understand the people and how they interacted, it's just way beyond anything that could be called coincidence.
Yeah. Jim, Cheryl had a question. She would like to know, where does John Milne come into the picture?
Well, he actually, there were several John Milnes, fathers and sons, and they were the actual stonemasons for the king, the personal stonemasons for the king. So when the stonemasons got better organized, which was in 1599, that's when the Shaw statutes came out, because they were randomly staying. Their lodges were just like any place they could stay near a building they were building, because they had to move around, because you don't build a cathedral, 10 cathedrals down the same road, so you build one, you're there for a year or two, then you move on. And that's what the original lodge was. But when they established an actual first physical lodge, which was Edinburgh Lodge number 1, this was before Freemasonry, they put him in charge of, I think he was what they called the warden. So he kind of oversaw things to make sure things were legal. Well, that position just continually got handed down to sons that were also named John Milne. And they were both the personal stonemason for the king, but also the warden for the stonemasons lodge. So they played a major role, the Milne family. And that's a big name up in Canada. I actually used to know a lady that was named Milne that came down from Canada.
Yep.
And so I don't know if it's necessary to rehash my theory, but
yes, please.
Well, Al Strachan in 1622, okay, William Alexander got Nova Scotia in 1621. He sent a boat over in 1622, but it never made it there because of a storm. So it got stranded in Newfoundland, and then they came back. Later in that year, in October, this gentleman named he wasn't too much of a gentleman, I guess, but his name was Alexander Strachan. I always call him Al. I don't want to get confused with the Alexander family. He stole the wife and the treasure from...
And the money,
Yeah, from the Keith Marshal, or he was the Earl Marshal of Scotland. And it was at the time the most massive treasure ever assembled. And I had used currency calculators to get it to be anywhere from 1 to 3 billion. But I actually happened to find somebody else writing about it, and they pegged it at $4 billion in today's.
Wow.
And, so he stole the money, and immediately they got indicted. He ended up marrying her, and George Keith died shortly afterwards. And they don't ever say what he died from, but he was 70 years old, and he may have died of a broken heart. He might have,
just broke.
because he didn't have any money anymore, or he might have got wounded in the robbery. We don't know, but Strachan, it wasn't just him. It was brother Robert Strachan. There was a Douglas involved in it, who was the nephew of the Keith man. One of Keith's, this wife was his second wife. So a son from that marriage was also involved in it. And so it looked like it was, the fix was in. All these people thought, I'm thinking that they're looking at going, he's 70 years old. He might have been cantankerous or something. He's going to give it away to some university or to the king or something, and we're beat out of it, and we're just going to rob it and let the chips fall. So anyway, they were indicted. So he stayed under indictment, Al Strachan, for 3 years. In the beginning of 1625, he's given a complete pardon by the king. By this time, well, that was still King James, who gave Nova Scotia to William Alexander. And then James and Alexander came up with this idea of the Knights Baronet of Nova Scotia. And where most knighthoods, you would earn it by service to the king, by going to a battle or whatever, slaying the dragon, whatever, In this case, you just got your wallet out. So it picked off a lot of other knighthoods, because they said, wait a minute, you can't just, you're cheapening.
Buy your way in, yeah.
Yeah. So James had to actually sign a document saying, I will never do this again. I'll never create another knighthood this way. But in the meantime, it was already created, and they had to pay a substantial fee. Again, it's hard to use currency calculators because you're talking different types of money. The Scottish pound was less money than the British pound at the time. And you're going from a long time ago. But in one, it actually came up to $500,000 that these people were paying to become a knight. But for that, they got 16,000 acres of land in Nova Scotia for themselves. And they got another 14,000 acres to build a town. They could name it whatever they wanted, and they could lay out the streets, do whatever they wanted. But the other thing they had to provide was 6 men that had some kind of skill, like a stonemason or a leather worker, builder, whatever. So that was the plan to get Nova Scotia going, and they were going to build 100 towns around. They all had to be on water, whether it was an inlet or a river or on the shoreline, but they all had to be accessed by water. Well, they never got more than one built, which was over at Port Royal, which is right across from
right across from here.
Yeah. And then the foundation up there 17 miles up above Oak Island is supposed to be an Alexander estate that was built up there. And my book, Oak Island and New Ross, about that. And so those were the only two places that they ever got a foothold. And it lasted from, the estate was supposedly built in 1623. Now that's according to the Alexander family and also to some Mi'kmaq legends. So, you don't have anybody else to go by, so why not believe them? And then Port Royal was from 1628 to 32, and they were ousted in 1632. So that was the extent of the Scots settlement there, but the implications of it have lived on because it's still called New Scotland. Scotia, there's still a lot of Gaelic spoken up there, and it was originally it was principally settled by a ton of Scottish people. Then the Irish came in, and the Germans came into Lunenburg, but it was even Prince Edward's Island. This Art Genus was telling me that he looked up all the names, or not all of them, but quite a few of the names that I mentioned as Knights Baronet. And they're standard names on Prince Edward Island. And he gave me a list of at least 12 names of people who were Knights Baronet who also now their families live on Prince Edward Island. So, and for most people that might not know, the original Nova Scotia included Prince Edward Island, and it included New Brunswick. It was one big area there. And then through the years, it got broken up a little bit. But so they came over, and Sir William Alexander actually chartered the area around Oak Island to Claude de la Tour and his son Charles. Well, Charles wouldn't accept it. He made them both knights baronet because he was trying to make peace with the French. Charles wouldn't accept it because he felt he was being a traitor to France, but his father did. And that charter was written in 1630, was witnessed by Al Strachan. So it says specifically in that charter, 14 leagues above, into the land and seas above Le Havre. Well, that's like 50 to 55 miles, and that goes almost to Peggy's Cove. It goes way past Mahone Bay, so it would have included Mahone Bay and all the islands, and probably all the way up to New Ross. And the charter still exists, so it's not like it's, just something written in a book or whatever. And so here you have Al Strachan signing a deed for land that included Oak Island, and then John Strachan ends up owning the Nolan Cross lots during one of the biggest digs on Oak Island. I think he owned them from 1841 to 1857. And so again, what are the coincidences? And this other deal is pretty cool, is that their shield since they know for sure 1309, the Strachan shield was the Highland Stag. And there is a ship in Mahone Bay that was on once by Captain Robert McKinnon, and he pulled up a bunch of forks and a couple spoons with the Highland Stag on the handle.
Yeah, you mentioned that before. That's intriguing. That is totally intriguing.
I know, it's still out there.
It's still out there. And to this day, no one's allowed to dive on it.
Right.
Wow.
And he told me because I said, where is it? And he wouldn't tell me. He said, you kidding? The treasure hunters don't tell where the treasure is, or they won't get it. That if anybody's going to dive on that, if they relax the treasure trove laws, it's going to be me. Well, that was in 2019 because Rick had set up the meeting, and then and he wouldn't tell them either because Doug told me the night before he wouldn't tell them. So 2020, at the height of COVID, I get a obscure email from him. We hadn't been emailing or anything. Tells me where it's at. So with no explanation, and it's kind of like you see Indiana Jones gets a letter on his desk,
Yeah, exactly.
It was kind of like that. And so I thought,
my gosh,
I wonder if he's thinking something could happen and somebody else should know where it's at.
Right.
So then I thought, well, I don't know if I want to be the only guy that knows where it's at. So I sat on it for about 3 months and really thinking it over. And finally, I thought, you know what? I'm just going to tell Rick in confidence, and I'm going to tell him outright that I'm not sure why McKinnon, told me, and I'm not sure he wants it broadcasted everywhere or whatever, but I'm going to tell you where he told me it is. And it's just down below Oak Island. It's, it's a little bit of a distance, but you can see it's, quote, within sight of Oak Island.
Wow.
Anyway, and he said there are 32 cannons on it, and I got a kick out of this first episode. Is going to be about the Tosha, because he actually went to the underwater archaeologist that Mel Fisher used and gave him all the data that he found about that ship, the cannons, what they looked like and all that. And the guy said it was built probably just before 1600, and there are only 2 countries using that style of trunnion, which holds the cannon on, and that was England and Spain. So he said it's either an English ship or a Spanish ship built around 1600. Well, and it's got stag silverware on it. So I mean, it's like, what else could for me, So but anyway, it's never gone anywhere because of the treasure trove laws, and I think all the other, when I went up in 2021, it was a nightmare getting across the took an hour and a half. And I had a stack of paper 3/4 inch thick, had letters of reference from Prometheus and letters from the Oak Island tours. And so I got up there, and I had a I had a test here for COVID. Then I had a test at the border. Then I had to test when I got to the island, and that little, what they call it, a guard shack, but literally they had a nurse there who would take your temperature with one of those
Yep.
units, and then you'd go up to a little nurse's station and take another test before you could get into the crowd. And they told you, you know, everybody's done this, so there shouldn't be any COVID here. But if you want to wear a mask, go ahead. But I didn't want to wear one because nobody else was, and who wants to wear one anyway?
Right.
You know. So, and I'd had every test. My arms are leaking. I've had so many shots, you know, COVID shots. So I didn't have to wear one. But what I noticed right off the bat was a real pall on everybody, like it just like a silence and not a lot of smiles or whatever. And it was so out of the ordinary. Mm-hmm. And I thought it must be the COVID thing, you know, that's got to be it. Well, it turned out that was right after they heard about the Mi'kmaq mm-hmm. artifacts. And I actually met that girl that worked on there, that archaeologist.
Aaron? No,
yeah. Miriam. And she was looking sad, and she said something about she was going on to, I think, forensic archaeology or something. And I didn't understand what was going on. You know, I'm an outsider to some degree, and I just got there that day, you know, so it was kind of confusing. Well, then after the war room meeting, the first one, I did 2 that year, we were out on the porch and everybody was disappearing, but Rick was kind of holding me there. And then he started telling me a bunch of stuff, and he told me how everybody was so upset about the ruling and the fact that Marty and Craig actually were so mad they went back to Detroit. And he said, they left me here holding the bag. He said, and I don't know what to do either. He said, we don't know what their motive is, you know, and we don't look at it as enough artifacts to prove there was anything here. He said, if you threw a rock across over there on the mainland, you'd probably find just as many artifacts. And Billy had said that in the show too. He said, I could stick my backhoe down in the ground here and pull up a bunch of these artifacts for you. But so I think they were more stunned than anything else. You know, they just like, what do you do next? You own the property. You can't even do anything on it. And that was our big, Charles took me down there and showed me the operation they had going, and it was much bigger than you've ever seen on TV. But they had to shut it all down, and I guess they buried it in, because when I watched the show, it didn't exist anymore like it did that.
What you do, you basically you put the material back in, maybe a tarp or something between if you want to, and let the swamp fill back up, and
yeah,
that preserves it better than anything else.
Right. Yeah.
So then he said, this was absolutely wild, but he said, hey, do you want to come over to my house tonight? I said, yeah, I'll come over. And I'd never been, I didn't even know where he lived or anything. I didn't know if he lived in an apartment or whatever. Well, he lives in a pretty nice house, but there's a story behind why he ended up with it. It's not because he thinks he's anything great or anything like that. It just was cheaper. It was a cheap, big house, but cheap, because the people that owned it lived in England and they couldn't come over because of COVID. So they wanted to get something out of the house. So anyway, I was over there for 3 hours. He showed me he had like a couple pallets of Dr. Pepper in his garage, which was funny. And he has a little woodwork shop out there where he makes a lot of wood things. But he talked and he talked. And I was just like, shut up, Jim. Just be a sponge. Just absorb this, because this is a lot of people would like to be sitting right where you are.
Yeah, a lot of people watching would love to.
So he told me a lot about his life, his early life and everything, and the situation on the island and everything. And the bottom line is everything isn't roses, but who thought it was? I mean, you can't take on a big project like that and not have issues. You got a lot of personalities, you got a lot of equipment that can break down. You think you're going down a path, and then boom, that path disappears on you. And the amount, like, you hear people complain, oh, that show kind of sucked, or whatever. Well, think if you spent $1 million on a hole and nothing came out, think how bad that would suck, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, they're just humans. They're all just like you see them on TV, and they're doing their level best. And that's what I've always loved about the show. You know, any hype that comes out of it does not come from the guys on the ground there. They're seriously, they get up, they're there. He gets up at 6, gets down there by 8. They have a production meeting where they get all the Prometheus people around. They say, okay, Gary and Rick want to go down to Smith's Cove. So Gary, you're going with them. You know, that kind of thing. They divvy everybody up, and then this day starts, and it doesn't quit till the sun goes down practically. You know, they only get a season. And then a lot of times they come into the war room after that. The one presentation I did, I pared it down to 1 hour. And honest to God, they kept me in there for 4 hours, and they'd been out in the field all day. It didn't start till dusk. They kept me in there. I'd just flown in, so I was a little bit tired. But these guys, you know, had been out all day. I couldn't believe they wanted to keep asking questions. So anyway, I've learned a lot that you know, that is all NDA to the nth degree, you know. But and it isn't something that I'm particularly happy that I know, because A, I can't talk about it, but B, some of it's not pleasant, is the only way I can put it. Anyway, so I got to tell you that we're going to change the subject dramatically here. So I got done with that book and got it out, and I had 2 in a row, and you know, within months of each other.
Yeah.
And both books, I mean, all of my books I stand by for anybody to get a good read out of them. And they're not that, I don't think they're that expensive. I mean, you can't go out to Applebee's and get a dinner for what you can buy the book for. And that, you know, but these last several have just been jammed with details and new ideas, like the Mary Queen of Scots Code. And also definite connections with the Freemasons and all that. So I was saying to myself, okay, you're done, because I mean, you said you're done so many times now, and you don't want to kick a dead horse, and maybe people are getting tired of it, and maybe they got to do some catching up. I was kind of thinking I'm probably several steps beyond the Oak Island guys, because they don't have time to, they don't have the luxury to sit there and read it. They got to be out there digging a hole. And so, you know, maybe down the road, if I find some more good stuff, whatever. So we happened to go watch Travis Walton, and he was near about 45 minutes away. And he was right there in front of me, like 8 feet away for the whole night. And his story was so fascinating. And for people that don't recognize it right off the bat, he was the lumberjack who was with 6 other lumberjacks coming down off the mountain when they saw a bright light. And he said it was machismo that made him get out of the truck and run over there. And then he said, the closer I ran, the more I realized I should have never got out of the truck. But he didn't put my fear to everybody. So he said, I just kept going. And then he was hit by some kind of a ray or a bolt or something from this vehicle. And he bounced off the ground and raised up in the air. Now, how far up in the air anybody saw is questionable, but the other 6 guys saw it happen, and they got scared and they took off. Then after they went down the road a ways, they're thinking, well, we can't just leave our buddy there. You know, we don't know what happened, but he could be laying on the ground dying or something. So they turned around and they went back, and they couldn't find him. So they went to the police, and that night they made them take a lie detector test, and 5 of them took it, and they all passed. So the lie detector guy said for 5 guys to make up a story, be interviewed separately by separate detectives, and all tell the same story, and then take a lie detector test, and all of them pass it, it's like millions to 1 odds that could ever happen. The 6th guy was a little bit nervous about doing it, but he eventually took it. And then Travis took several of them later on. He took several of them, but he was so emotionally, when they finally found him like 5 days later, he didn't even know it wasn't the same day. And he didn't remember a lot until he went under hypnosis. But it was just a fascinating story. And to have 6 witnesses watch it happen, and they all passed lie detector tests, and you passed the lie detector test, there's probably not another abductee story out there that has as much credibility to it. And and I asked him, what was it like when this beam hit you? And he said it was like if you were playing football and somebody you didn't see coming hit you from the side, and it just jolts your whole body. So that's the closest thing I can. So that got me thinking about Skinwalker. And I have to say, and this I maybe shouldn't say it, I don't know, but when the other Travis Taylor, was first on, that's his name, right?
Yeah. Yep. Dr. Travis
When
Taylor.
he was first on Oak Island, I was a little bit resentful because I didn't think that his what he presented there was really made any sense, and it was probably just a little bit of jealousy, truthfully, because he looked like he was going to be a golden boy for him. But I do know that what you present doesn't always get on the show. So
that's very true.
4 hours and they put 10 minutes on, and it's construed the way that, by the time somebody's jotting stuff down and then it gets all the way out to Los Angeles, the poor film cutter out there, he's got to go nuts because they got like 2 or 3 guys with cameras, GoPro type cameras, and then a couple of drones. And so say you were filming outdoors, which we did for a couple hours one time, there's 5 times 2 hours that this editor's got to look at and go, yeah, this looks better than that, and this could be this, and whatever, so it's a miracle that they get to show out, as far as I'm concerned. And there's a lot of me laying on the cutting room floor because I'd been filmed for about 20 hours. But anyway, and then I started seeing Travis on Curse of Oak, or Ancient Aliens, and I thought, well, he's just a personality that they brought in. And when I first started watching Skinwalker, I think about the first 8 episodes, and I still had this feeling that I shouldn't have ever had. And so I didn't take much of it serious. But then I did a binge watch, and I 100% agreed with everything he said. And I thought, Travis is the only one that gets it, what they should be doing here, and maybe all the testing, some of the testing might be hokey or whatever. It's what they're using, whatever they have or something, but at least they're doing something, and they're trying to answer questions and everything. And I found myself agreeing with him on so much stuff that I totally have changed my attitude about his knowledge and his, and not just his knowledge, but his kind of like redneck get her done.
Yeah,
attitude.
exactly. Yeah, he certainly does.
Put some duct tape on that rocket because we're going to shoot it.
Well, it's interesting because, and yes, folks, we have kind of shifted gears here. James was telling us a little bit about this in the pre-show, and, about, and all of about my, interest in the show. I was just out there, in Utah, and I spent time with all of the guys, from Skinwalker Ranch, Travis included. But this was really interesting, and Jim shocked me here when he told me about this, just in the pre-show meeting. He was talking about Skinwalker Ranch, and I went, wait a minute. We just went from Templars to Skinwalker Ranch. Both of their subjects are subjects that I am very interested in. And now it looks like Jim is going to be doing some research into this as well. But you have a different take a little bit. I know I interrupted your train of thought there, but you have a little bit different take on this. Those guys are going through the science, and they are, like you said, they're doing the best they can with the technology that they have, and coming up with, and Eric Bard, I mean, that man himself, he creates and solders his own circuitry together to make GPS units and all of this. I mean, the guys there are just phenomenal. But But here we go. So now we've gone from Oak Island. We're jumping over a little bit to talk about this. So talk a little bit about your theory on this.
How it got started was that I, for some reason, I don't even know why, I started looking at the early history, because of course that's me. I'm the early history.
Yep.
You know, what's the background history?
Yep.
And I looked up this monk Chavano, who was the first owner. He didn't own the whole 512 acres that they own now.
They own now, yep.
He originally owned 300 and some, and then the government knocked that down to 200 and some. But sometimes his name was spelled like he was French. Sometimes it was spelled like he was Irish. He was said to be a settler that moved there and got scared and left. None of that was true. He was Ute. In fact, he was a chief of the Utes, and so was his father, and so was his grandfather, and his grandfather was the medicine man too of the tribe. Yep. And both his father and his grandfather were killed in bad ways, and also his uncle was too. And so they were chased out of their land in Colorado and moved down to the reservation that borders Skinwalker Ranch right now. And through that, it was kind of like the Trail of Tears all over again. And so when the government opened up land for sale there for settlers, he bought Skinwalker Ranch, or he didn't call it that, but he bought that,
right?
And moved his family there, and he lived there in a wigwam. And there's two photos of him during the time that he lived there. One, he's wearing the headdress, and the other one, he's got his whole family in his wigwam there. And so he wasn't a settler that got scared and left. He was probably the person that put the curse on the ranch because of all this stuff that happened. And when he left in 1916, the government had not only cut his acreage down from 300, and I think it was 380 down to 208, but again, those figures, but they also reserved the right to put a right-of-ways through and canals through. Well, how much, if you had a 200-acre farm and somebody put a canal through it, it's going to take a good chunk of your farm. And I think he just got left in 1916 and cursed the place. That's my theory. But I've identified another Ute chief. He was actually Shoshone, but he's often said to be a Ute chief, and there's some kind of familial relationship between the Shoshone tribe and the Utes. And his actual name was Walker, and he it was involved in slavery, horse thieving. He was the biggest horse thief in the area. He would steal a lot of women and children, and he was originally selling them as slaves in Mexico. And when the Mormons came in there, they started buying them to save their lives and also to increase their flock. Well, now that there was a market, he's kidnapped even more women and children. And the ultimate sin, I guess you would say, was that he was involved with human sacrifice. And when he was buried, he had his wife and his two best horses buried with him, killed and buried with him.
Oh, wow.
He had a live slave boy put on his chest, and they threw the rocks over him, buried that boy alive, and had a young girl and a young boy chained on the top of the thing until they died.
Oh, man.
And so one of the Mormons who had been dealing with him agreed to say words over his grave, but the guy had no idea all that was going to go on. And he was outnumbered and he didn't know what to do. So he just went ahead and said the words over the grave, but then he wrote about it later. Like, I couldn't believe what was going on. So that's how we know that all happened. And the archaeological dig went back and they did find the right kind of bones to prove that that's what happened, so that proved the story. And the guy's name was Walker. And so how his connection with the Navajo was that there was actually a war called Walker's War. He caused so much trouble that he had to take refuge with the Navajos. And so I think there's a little bit of a chance that he is the he was the inspiration for
Skinwalker.
or the Skinwalker, because he was such a terrible, terrible man, just basically raising hell all through that area, all through Utah and Nevada and Colorado.
Wow.
And anyway, but there's two angles to this, because I say in the beginning of the book that I don't think it can only be solved scientifically. I think it has to be solved through science and imagination. And you have to read the book to really understand my theory in that. But I quote some famous inventors like Tesla, Edison, Einstein, and Curie, and how they talk about imagination being the source of their science,
Right.
Not just mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the only part of the book that scares me a little bit, is that I took years of classes. I took 4 formal years of classes in intuition, or if you want to call it mediumship, metaphysical studies. And it included everything that you can imagine: remote viewing, crystals, all of that stuff. And my two teachers, husband and wife, she studied under a lady who learned from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and his wife. And her husband learned under Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. He learned meditation, transcendental meditation.
Right.
And they were working for Tony Robbins, of all people. They were working for the self-help guru, Tony Robbins. They actually watched fire with him on the streets of Manhattan. They decided to go out on their own because he was more practical. They were more spiritual type of situation, But so they formed this school. It's 30 some years old now, but they were my two main teachers. But they had teachers from all over the world come in, from Canada and France and Sweden or Switzerland, one of those, and the British Isles. And I took 4 years, and then I took 12 more years of 1 or 2 refresher type classes for the next years to keep my fingers. But one of the things about it is that it takes a certain mentality you have to be in a certain mentality to do that kind of stuff. And the day-to-day does not want to allow that. It just doesn't want to allow that. It's putting, you got to worry about everything, and how can you be free and open with your brain and whatever?
Yeah.
So after 16 years of it, but an awful lot of experiences, an awful lot of them. And I recount a couple of them in the book just to show what it was like. But I sort of gave it up, although I think that it follows me, because I find all these things, like for Oak Island, I think I'm done, and then boom, there's something staring me right in the face. I'm like, where the heck did that come from? And
now I got to write about it.
Yeah.
So when do you expect this book to come out, Jim?
Well, I'd love it to come out by Halloween. I don't know if I can do it. I only have like 18 pages to finish, and I know what I want to say. I just haven't formed the words yet. But then it has to go through a proofreading and get proofs from the self-publishing place and all that. But it would just be a kick if it could come out right around Halloween.
That would. I'd have to do our Halloween special show with you on it. Yeah, that would have to be because we were just talking about doing a Halloween special show. And if you get that book done,
even more reason to work to get it
done.
done.
There you go.
So there are certain things that you could explain logically and pragmatically. For instance, the wolf. There aren't supposed to be any wolves in Utah, but they are. And the Shermans owned it from 94 to 96. And in 95, they brought down a bunch of wolves from Canada into Idaho because their population was disappearing. And these were bigger wolves. And they had collars on them. They tracked several of them going right down through Utah. They mostly came in the northeast section where Skinwalker Ranch is located. And some of them were trapped in coyote traps and things like that. One guy shot it. He didn't know what it was, got scared and shot it. So it being pragmatic again, they could have actually seen an actual wolf. And the original story about him shooting it, Terry Sherman, was that he shot it with a shotgun. Well, I don't know if you guys hunt at all, but you can't kill a big animal with a shotgun unless maybe if you have a slug in it and you're close enough. But
Right.
You'd have to be very close, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially a full-size wolf. They're like
Yeah.
150 to 180 pounds, right? There's
Yeah.
nothing small about them.
They said the largest one that they weighed was 212, but typically
Could be.
typically they're around 100, but 212 would be a heck of a big wolf. So if you imagine, just being pragmatic again, that this wolf is roaming down from, because they don't know the state border, they don't know, no wolves in Utah, they come down
or property lines.
They go over and see a calf and start pulling on its nose, and the only thing he's got there is a shotgun with buckshot in it, and he unloads on it, and it doesn't phase it, but it ticks it off, and it takes off. All that could be pragmatic. And so I think there are pragmatic answers to some things, but I also think that overall, the bigger picture is that that area received a lot of radiation from the Nevada testing site, and that can be proven, number one, because just about 130 miles from the Nevada testing site, John Wayne filmed a movie there called The Conqueror, and he died of about 5 different kinds of cancer. His sons both had cancer. Two or three of the leading ladies in it died. The producer died. 91, 220 people involved with that movie died from cancers. Not just one, but multiple cancers.
I never knew that. Wow.
And they say that the reason they think it happened was that dust had settled, but they had so many horses in the movie. And one group, the Genghis Khan and his guys fighting somebody else, and they just filmed those over and over and over again. And there's actually film footage of all the dust in the air, and they think those people breathed in all that radioactive dust, and that's what took them down. Are we getting close? I don't want to.
Yeah, we got about 8 more minutes. I want to wrap it up here. Yep.
Go as fast as I can. So,
okay.
So I think that there is a lot of radiation, and the one thing about radiation, air with radiation in it, is it settles deep, like it settles in valleys, like Skinwalker Ranch is in, or in canyons, like that movie was filmed in. And if it got into a valley, if there were caves that went down even deeper, it would go down even deeper. So there could be a massive amount of radiation in hidden places on that ranch. And gamma radiation, which they've measured a lot of, is the more serious. You know, a bomb, it gives off alpha, beta, and gamma.
Yep.
Alpha, beta, you can kind of live through, and you don't want to go eat it or anything, you know. But but gamma is what, you know, you get very close to it. And one of the symptoms is nausea. If you get a heavy dose for even just for a couple seconds, you'll get nausea, which is one of the. So I think that there's a chance that that's what's causing a lot of the crazy readings. It's causing instruments to malfunction. It's causing people to get sick and all that. But at the same time, I'm a real big proponent of wavelengths, and that was one thing we're taught in schools, that everything vibrates, that everything you see is vibrating at a wavelength.
Yep.
And if you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, you'll see how it goes from radio waves to microwaves on up to the visible. Our visible wavelengths are so tiny compared to the whole wavelength, and it continues on up to gamma. But on either end, it could still go. There's still room for more waves after gamma, and there's still room for more waves the opposite way, radio. And so I've developed this theory, which I don't think is totally new to me, but maybe the way I'm expressing it is that it's the interdimensional theorem rather than the extraterrestrial, in that there are things that exist every day all around us, but we just can't see them because we can't see infrared, we can't see x-rays,
Exactly. Yep.
lasers, whatever. But at certain times, if conditions are right, whatever those conditions need to be, these things can appear, and it could explain all kinds of sightings, like see the blessed, you know, Our Lady of Lourdes, Our Lady of Fatima, angels, devils, uh, all of these things, because so many people have reported these, and UFOs too, and UFOs.
Yep.
So many people, and I spent a chapter just talking about high level people that risked everything. John Podesta, Edgar Mitchell, Nick Pope, and Hynek, who had positions in even the recently the Israeli general, whoever that was heading up their program, they're all coming out and saying, or they all came out and said, no, this isn't hallucinations, and this isn't, somebody making it up. I mean, some of it might be misinterpretations, but there's too many of them, too many big level people, high level people willing to put their, and Lou Elizondo too.
Yep.
He heading up the recent Pentagon thing. All these people coming out, they're not just coming out and saying this to sell a book. They're coming out because they believe it. So anyway, that's kind of what it's about. And I talk a lot about spirituality in there, and how what we learned could fit this paradigm of wavelengths and vibration of wavelengths. And I know it gets a little heady, but I've seen and read a lot of stuff that's way beyond this. So I think that
so we might be sensing a future guest at the War Room at Skinwalker Ranch then.
Yeah.
I wrote Mr. Fugel with my Monk Chavano information, and he was very pleased, and he sent it on to everyone. And so I'm trying to think. I think I have what he wrote here somewhere, but it doesn't matter. But he was very pleased to get it, and I don't know. They actually, somebody from there contacted me and said, "Well, how do you want to handle this?" And I had no idea what I was going to. So I John Levy at Prometheus, and I said, "Is this guy somebody real? I mean, should I even answer him?" And he said, "Oh yeah, he's one of the Skinwalker producers." But nothing came of that. And here it is. This is what Fugel wrote me an email. "This is much appreciated and sheds light on a topic and historical record that is often confusing and inconsistent. I have been trying to verify the origin of the Skinwalker curse that involves the area and property, and what many have referred to as Skinwalker Ridge that runs along the edge of the Mesa Plateau."
Right.
So the fact that I sent that about Monk, and I sent that about the man named Walker and all that, was in response to that. So anyway,
well, that's a start. You have their attention, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's and whether I go there or not, I don't really. I mean, I would like to, but it's not going to make or break it for me.
Well, take me with you.
Ideas, and I want to get them out there to people, and that's the way all my books have been. They're written because of the ideas and the information I found in them. Period.
Right.
And if people want to know it and read it, fine. If they don't, go to Applebee's and get a dinner instead.
Well, just to switch gears again, I can say from reading this one, and you can tell from all my little tabs going through it, that it's given me a lot to think about. Yeah. And when I go back and look at the way you lay it out, Jim, and the way you tie in people like Strachan, Keith, and Bacon, Alexander, you tie all these guys in, you kind of makes you go from one train of thought thinking, oh, only this could have happened, or only that could have happened. But when you look at this, it's like the Magic 3 or the Magic 4 here. They're
and
there's guilt by association here somewhere.
Yeah. And tons of things were happening. It isn't everything is connected. That's what sometimes is lost. Life doesn't happen in a vacuum. And if your buddies, if you got 2 or 3 rich buddies and you see opportunities here, there, or somewhere else, you're going to go together and pursue that.
Well, when you've got a known criminal joining up with guys like Bacon and William Alexander and becoming a member of the Privy Council.
Yep.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, anyway, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
I love all the people that you have on and everything. It's a real experience. And I mean, if you hadn't started this, there'd be a real empty hole.
Well, I tell you, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it very much, Jim. And I think that, now you've touched on a couple of different, I'm so into your books and everything because of what Tom was just saying, how you tie all these people together. It just it's not a coincidence, and
Right.
it's all there. I mean, you're putting it all there. Now you're stretching out and you're going into a completely different area, which I do all the time, going into the whole Skinwalker Ranch thing. I can't wait to see this book that you're working on right now about this because of the approach you do on it.
Well, and you know, Rick said that one time on one of the shows there, that I think it was on a Matty Blake show. I wasn't on the screen at the time, but he would mention me, and he said he connects a lot of dots, and a lot of those dots are really serious. The way they, you know,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
he's not just following the pattern that was in the book. You know, like when I thought about that after he said that when I was a kid, and I'd get those books. You could tell if it was a duck, you know, or a dog or whatever. I tried to make something else out of it. I tried to get the dots to go a different other figure out, but you know,
That's hilarious. Well, I'm really looking forward to this coming out. Now we're gonna, and you touched on a couple of subjects here. I'm gonna say real quick, you touched on a couple of subjects here that I have been, and I saw, you know, Tom and I were smiling about this because, you know, I did a show called Can't Touch This. And it was talking about just that thing, that there's certain things in this world. I mean, our hearing is so limited to a very small spectrum of the hearing. And same thing with what we can see, like you mentioned, where it's such a small area of what the broad spectrum of light that we can see only a very small portion of it. Is it also possible that there are things around us that we can't touch because we're limited in our touch as well? That's what that was about. And you touched on this, and I'm like,
well, even in smell, because like
yes,
they say,
yes.
90,000 times the smell ability human. 90,000. I mean, it's like crazy, you know. So our senses are limited, and I don't know if they're limited. They're obviously limited from a physical point of view, but I think they also might be limited from a mental point of view, that we're always so focused on what we got to do, our worries.
Yes.
You know, life is pain, and you're always trying to get yourself out of the pain and have some nice, joyful days. That's what you know, that's kind of what the whole purpose of life is to make something out of it while you're here. So, but that takes your attention. I mean,
it does. It really does. I think we've closed our minds over the years because and technology does it also. It closes our minds down to this small little area when in fact it used to be much brighter or broader at one time. And because of technology does it too. I mean, we spend so much time with this thing right here doing all the work for us.
Yeah.
And it closes us down.
And people usually look at their life from their own point of view, or their neighborhood, or their job, or whatever. But I've traveled all over the world. I've been to the Great Wall and the Terracotta Soldiers, to Machu Picchu and Cusco and the pyramids and the Sphinx, and I mean, just all over. I could Chichen Itza, whatever. And you look at these societies, they were accomplishing something major. I mean, for one thing, what they accomplished lasted, maybe not in perfect condition, but it's lasted thousands of years in some cases. You know, they kind of knew what they were doing, and to even think about doing that nowadays, you know, Saxy women, I think they call it. It's up above Cusco. Those are those rocks that weigh, you know, 15, 20, 100 tons a piece, that are all put together so you can't even stick a razor blade in between them. And we went and saw that. So nothing will open your mind more than to go overseas and look at something. And even the cathedrals that the Templars built, you know, in England and Scotland, and the castles. You just look at that and you think, who would even do that for you today? Where would you get 1,000 stonemasons that could build something like that? Where would they ever get the skill? You wouldn't, you know. And they you know, the Romans had the concrete that set up and watered, and we lost track of it till 1700, I think it was, when some guy in Britain figured out that what they did, you know. And so they might not have been as sophisticated, like you said, of the iPhone, that kind of sophistication, which probably is dumbing us down.
It is dumbing us down. I'm sorry, but it is.
but they knew other things that we haven't even been able to figure out yet. And
Exactly.
the evidence is still there. We're looking at the evidence and we're thinking, how the heck did they do this?
Yeah, exactly.
I know we descended the second biggest pyramid down to the sarcophagus. Well, it wasn't there, but the platform for it was. And there's beautiful, gorgeous paintings all the way down. Now, there was no electric light back then. So that's one of the biggest questions is how the heck the ceilings are white. So they weren't using torches.
Torched. Yeah.
Unless they torched them and painted them and then they went in and painted the ceiling or something. But I mean, just one wall of that, to even find an artist that could paint a single wall of that stuff, it's just crazy. And then everybody knew the equinox and all that. We've been in like at Abu Simbel, where we were actually there the day before the light went all the way back to the Holy of Holies. So it was just off like 1 foot from it. And the guy said, if you come back tomorrow, it'll be dead on there, but it wasn't in our schedule to come back. But how many places are set up like that? The Newport Tower, so many places around the world, up in Ireland, set up for that. Stonehenge is another one. They're set up to get the equinoxes and to understand weather. And I think because they didn't have an iPhone or all this other TV and all that, they studied the stars. That was probably their television. Hey, tonight we're going to watch the stars. Give me some of that beer that you made in that barrel, and we'll sit here and watch the stars and try to figure out what they're doing, and
they are.
Yeah.
Nowadays, we live on the lake, and you know what that's like, that you can see a pretty big sky on a clear night. But I mean, even after a half hour, you're tired of looking at it. But they didn't have choice. They didn't have anything else to look at, and they had no light. There was no oil lamps.
Wait, Oak Island's on in 20 minutes. I got to get inside. Yeah.
So Oak Island has been my destination TV. The destination TV means you watch it no matter what.
Right.
Since I didn't get into it till the third season, but lately just the other day we binge watched probably 6 episodes of Skinwalker over again, mostly looking for making sure that I didn't write something that wasn't correct. And stories get told differently too. I mean, that's part of the problem is, Sherman said he used a shotgun, and then now it's a 30-57 and a rifle, they said he said they had 3 cattle partially mutilated, but then his wife said they had a bunch of them mutilated, so you get these different quotes, and authors pick it up and newspapers pick it up. And I actually start my book with a story about me that the newspaper, it was a somewhat heroic thing that I did to save my dog, and the newspaper wrote it up the next day like I was some bumblehead that had to be saved by 2 people. It was just ridiculous. And I knew right then, I learned that at about 10 or 12 years old, double check everything, get sort whatever, because you can, but anyway, I don't want to keep you too long here. I know it's hard 9, but
final word there, Tom, what you got?
Well, just from me to all our friends and family and people around Canada, it's Canadian Thanksgiving this weekend. So have a great Thanksgiving, everyone.
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Thanksgiving to everyone up there for sure. Well, I had a wonderful time here tonight with you, Jim. As always, you're always a delight to have on the show, and you are just so packed full of information. I don't know how you can recite. Well, I guess after writing all these books, you can, but you recite this stuff. It's right on the top of your head. All these names, all these people, places, and dates. It's like, how does he keep all this straight? I just don't know. But I tell you, now you're going to be going. Go ahead.
Then I'll see a guy downtown that I've known most of my life, and I can't remember his name. I told my wife, here's the plan. If I don't introduce you, you introduce yourself to him, and he'll say, yeah, I'm John.
Yeah, we all know.
That works.
That works because, it's the old thing. You walk through the door and forget what you went in there for.
Oh, well, that never happens.
I do have this thing with this kind of stuff in my, I think it drives some people crazy that how can you remember that, but I do. I just, so anyway, I also, not want to thank the two of you, but I want to thank all of my readers, and I guess you could call them fans. But I've received a lot of emails and whatever with ideas and questions, and I can tell that there's a group of people. It's not gigantic, but there's a group of people that are really paying attention and actually turned me to another corner, like Art Genis did, to another corner. And I can't absorb it all. I can't take every theory and investigate it to the nth degree, but a lot of times I want it all to come to me, and I can figure out which one where I want to go with it. But so I just want to thank them, because I know there's a pretty loyal contingency out there. And that's the other thing I wanted to say is I thought maybe I would sell all 9 books as a set, all signed by me.
Oh, wow.
So if anybody's interested, they can just send me an email and we'll work it out. I actually have done this now 3 times, and I've got another one ready to go out. But
that's fantastic.
James A McQuiston, McQuiston. I should have given you a graphic. James A McQuiston at gmail.com, and we make the arrangements. And I have enough to do maybe another half dozen packages before Christmas. It takes me so long to get the books compared to if I ordered it prime, I'd have it tomorrow. I order an author copy and it's a month or a month and a half. It makes it so difficult to plan. But I mean, other than that facet of it, the rest of it's great to go through.
All right. Well, fantastic. That's great. And again, his books are available out on Amazon. You can get them there, and they'll get shipped to you in just a couple of days. Look for James A McQuiston. You'll find
couple of days, folks. He'll show up.
Yep. And I've got several of them myself, and I've got the new one on the way, and I'm looking forward to the Skinwalker book. This is going to be great. And we're going to have you on now, because I do all the Skinwalker stuff as well. So we're going to have you on that. We're going to have to get you to come out and be an insider to the Tom and I are insiders out at the Skinwalker Ranch.
Really?
Yeah. And speaking of which, folks, if you want to be an insider at the Skinwalker Ranch, you can look in the description below, and you can see there's a link right there. You can click on that link. It'll take you right there, and you can sign up for the trial period and see what being a Skinwalker insider is all about, and then go from there. And if you like it and stick around, I'll be heading back over there tonight, because I love chatting with all the folks. And also I wanted to mention too, before I wrap it up, is that we also have I have a Discord channel. That is now, it's in the link below. You can see there's an invite. You click on that, it'll take you to the Discord channel. You can sign up there. It's all free and everything. It's a place for people to chat. There's voice chat, there's text chat. You can talk about, there's a room there for Skinwalker Ranch and paranormal stuff, and then there's the Oak Island one there. Go there, you can have it and talk with each other and share information back and forth. And that is also in the link below. You can check it out there as well.
You don't, do you, buddy?
Huh?
You don't quit, do you? Do you ever sleep? You drive.
I know, all over the country, and then now I'm back in Michigan, and but it's I tell you, it's been great. And I have I mentioned this earlier, that we have the book that Jim and I are working on together. He wrote the book; it's all his work, and I am doing the voice for it. So I'm reading it, and it's going to be coming out eventually. When I get it done, I'm settled down now. I can spend the next couple of months working on this, so it won't take that long. But we're gonna get this book done. It's gonna be an audio book of Jim's very first novel, correct? You called it a novel, that one.
Well, it's actually it's the second book I did with dialogue in it, historical fiction or historical
fiction, yeah.
But why it happened was because I had 4 books out by then, and I told my son, I said, I wish this was all in one book, because it's all one story. He said, well, why don't you do a historical fiction book, because people really love them, and just put everything you have to that point in it. Well, I did, but now I have so much more. So I'm rewriting it as you're practicing reading. But when it does finally come out, it's going to be totally different than Oak Island, the novel. I mean, it's still going to be called that, but it's going to, maybe we'll change it. Maybe we'll change the name. I don't know. But anyway, it's going to include all the newer information too. But, there's some people that just love that. And I do too. I mean, I like to read something that's lively, but I also know that most of it's true,
Right.
Books. Anyway, Well, thanks again. Thank you, Tom.
Yep. Thanks, Jim.
Yep. Appreciate you very much for coming on the show. Folks, thank you for being here with us tonight. We've had a great time with James A. McQuiston, better known as Jim McHugh, as I call him. And we thank him very much for coming on the show. And we thank you for being here. Don't forget, tomorrow night we're going to the paranormal and that side tomorrow night with a little episode of the Beyond Our World. John Edwards and I are hosting Carl the Crusher. Carl has a lot of videos out on YouTube. He does a lot of paranormal stuff, and he's also done some Skinwalker Ranch investigations as well. So Carl the Crusher tomorrow night, 7:30, right here on J Free 906 at this channel. We'll see you here. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate
You're
you.
welcome.
Sir.
It's been a pleasure, Jim. Great to see you.
Yes, thank you, guys.
All right. Good night, everybody. We'll see you here tomorrow night, 7:30. All right. Bye-bye now.